Mary here from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and happy Thursday. Let me just get situated here and make sure everyone can hear me. Hey, hello. Alrighty, everybody. I'm Mary from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and I try to go live here on my YouTube channel every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time. For those of you joining me the first time, welcome. And for those of you that join me regularly, welcome back. Today's topic is tips for transplanting. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of things that I do, a little things that I recommend or that work for me. And you are welcome to, sorry, I can't see. Now I can see. You are welcome to chime in with what works for you as well. So it is hot and humid right now in East Texas. I am outside, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to go live outside because we had rain on the forecast off and on all day long. So fortunately, I can go live in the garden today. Because it's so hot. Hey, Christine. Because it's so hot here, I definitely have to stay hydrated. So, speaking of the weather, if you are transplanting directly into your garden, not up potting, you need to watch the weather. If you live in an area that gets cold, you want to make sure that you wait until all of the time for freezing has passed, that you don't have any major swings in the weather. So I am totally guilty of transplanting too early sometimes. Sometimes it works in my favor and we don't have harsh weather. Sometimes Mother Nature says, ha, fooled ya, and I lose a couple of plants. Hey, Denise, thanks for joining me. So I do keep an eye on the weather. I do make sure that we don't have any kind of crazy weather, or usually it's past my last frost date. Just depends on how I'm feeling at the time. And so watching the weather is super important. Ken says I just got my notification. Hi, and Missy's joining us as well. So after you've already determined, keeping in mind we're talking about directly transplanting into the garden, not up potting, you know that your weather is going to be cooperative, or you hope that your weather is going to be cooperative, and you're going to get started on hardening off your seedlings. Now, not everybody hardens off their seedlings. Some people just go for it. But if you are growing indoors at like optimal temperature, no bugs, you're able to watch your moisture, everything, it's a good idea to harden off your seedlings before you transplant in the garden, because you don't want them to go into shock, or you don't want the harsh sunlight compared to your nice bulbs. You don't want the heat if it's significantly warmer outside, or if it's cooler outside. You want to get them acclimated. So hardening off your seedlings is getting them more acclimated. So you see I've got a tray over here in the back. That is just one of many trays that I've got. And I've got them on the back patio for right now, because some of them I planted outside because I didn't have the space to plant directly in the garden. And honestly, I like to do tomatoes. Hey, Jane, I like to transplant my tomatoes, even if I'm doing it outside. It gives me a better idea of where everything's at. It gives my seedlings a chance to kind of grow a little bigger before I put them outside. I know some people have problems with pill bugs eating your seedlings, and when they're teeny tiny, they just a couple bites and you lose that seedling. So I've got a little one here I can show you. Hey, DJ Harper, thanks for joining us. This is one of my little teeny seedlings for my patio, and I'll show you a little bit how I prepare them before I transplant them out. So give them a couple hours a day. It doesn't really need to be more than like a week of hardening off, or a couple days. Some people do 1 or 2 days and that's it. Totally up to you and what works for your area. So today we're talking about tips for transplanting. Hey, Green Thumb Garden, thanks for joining me. Prepare your spots. Hey, Moonblade, and thanks for joining me as well. Before you transplant into your garden, you want to prepare a spot, and you want to make sure it's an adequate spot. So for example, my tomatoes need full sun, and my lettuce, which actually I generally direct sow my lettuce, but if I was transplanting lettuce, it doesn't need full sun. It can get 4 hours of sun and you're good to go. So prepare your area, prepare your garden space, prepare your soil. Now, I've already discussed how I've prepped my soil in advance. Sorry, I have hornets and I'm kind of making sure he doesn't come over near me. So I prepped these garden spaces early. I pulled the weeds. I gave them to my chickens. I put in a layer of mountain flower root boost, and then I topped it with a layer of fresh soil because raised beds generally, when I get started on them, it starts to break down. The larger pieces of material of organic matter are starting to break down, and so it gets a little more compacted each year. So I put a nice fresh layer of soil here. So that was my garden prep. And of course, this bed, this garden is full sun. So I can plant any heat-loving plant here in full sun, tomatoes, peppers. I don't transplant squash, but I'll get to that in just a second. So prepping your spot is super important. And knowing what works in what area. So a couple weeks ago, I went live and I had a partial sun full garden video. Now I'm hoping it doesn't rain on me today. It is a little grayer out today. I'm not sure if you noticed or not, but I'm hoping it doesn't rain on me and I can finish my video. Now, a couple weeks ago, I did the video about full sun, partial shade gardens. And in that video, I explained what specific varieties will grow better in partial shade and which varieties really need full sun. So if you want to check out that video after my live chat tonight, go ahead and check out in the live section of my video on my channel. So knowing what goes where so you can prep your garden space better is super important. And also I know that my they're called heavy feeders. So peppers, eggplant, tomatoes, they usually have a higher nutrient requirement than, say, lettuce. So that's another way that you want to prep your soil. That's why I put mountain flower root boost in here. And then I gave it a chance to kind of mesh into the soil and kind of get ready to go for me. Before putting tomatoes in the ground, here's one tip that I really like. Before putting your seedling into the ground, you want to trim the lower leaves. So this little baby isn't going into the ground. I already transplanted a bunch of my tomatoes in over there and back there. So I didn't have, actually I do have one, but it doesn't have a lot of leaves. So I'll show this one to you. So you want to trim the lower leaves off of your tomato plant. This is specific for tomatoes. So I'm going to take the little teeny, these are the first leaves, one here, and the first leaf here. Now, if I really wanted to, I can pull out this third one as well, and I'm just going to do it since I'm here. Okay, see that? So now I have more space of bare stem here. I've got about 1.5 inches of bare stem space. Now, when I go to transplant this seedling, I'm going to transplant this deeper than the root ball or the level of the soil. Why would I do that? Now, you probably can't see it because it's super, super tiny, but tomato seedlings have a hairy stem, and you can transplant this seedling deeper than it's already in its pot here, and this plant will grow roots from the stem that is buried. So it will give you a stronger, better root. Awesome, right? Hey, hog legs. So you can have a stronger root system here and hopefully have a much stronger plant by, again, trimming off the lower leaves, because you don't want to leave them on. You don't want anything, you don't want the leaves to get any kind of diseases on it. So when I transplant this, again, see, you got all that space there. I can transplant that deeper so I have a better root. And then I also am not going to be worried about having the leaves touching the soil and then maybe having some soil-borne diseases on your leaves. That's not really fun either. Hey, Esther's daughter, thanks for joining me. So that is specific for tomatoes. I always do this before I transplant my tomatoes, and I typically have a much stronger plant. Now, if it's a hot day and maybe you spent the winters inside and you go outside and it's a hot day and you're working in the garden, what do you do after you're done? Or what do you do while you're in the garden? You hydrate. So when you transplant your seedlings, you want to make sure the soil is moistened before you transplant. And then B, you want to water your seedlings in. Super important. And I know it doesn't sound like anything that's super important, but not everybody knows these things. You want to give a really good water when you transplant your seedlings. Some people like to use different types of, I wouldn't say soil amendments, but fertilizers, like worm tea or compost tea or kelp tea. There's a lot of different things that you can use if you really wanted to. Totally up to you, but you really want to give it a good soaking. And then what I normally do is I will soak the soil, soak the seedling. I call it watering it in. I'm sure there's, depending on what you call it. And then you want to allow it to let those roots really grow down into the soil before you water it again. You don't want to overwater it. So that is a super common thing, is either not enough water or too much water. So I generally check my seedlings depending on if we've got rain coming or if we don't have any rain coming, and I'll get to that in just a second. And I'll check it to make sure it doesn't completely dry out, but I do want to give it time so that I'm not watering it every day when I first transplant them, because we want to let them get acclimated to the area. Now, I mentioned rain. Uh, one of the reasons I'm not going to transplant live tonight is we're supposed to have an inch and a half of rain tomorrow. So I don't want to transplant too many of these in here and then possibly have it just come a deluge and break off my teeny tiny seedlings. So let me answer that question for Missy. Do you water the seedlings before you remove it and it's sell before removing it to the transplant? No. Generally, I will, because I don't want super soggy soil when I transplant. So this I watered yesterday. And I would let it dry out a little more. Not totally dry. Hey, David, I don't want it to be totally dry because I don't want to harm it at all, and I don't want to weaken the seedling, but I don't want it to be soggy soil. So I'm going to wait a day or two after I water, and then I'm going to transplant it, and then I'm going to water it again, because you don't want to water a seedling and then transplant it and then water it again, because then you're potentially overwatering your plant. Now, what some people do is loosen the roots, and I do that often. So I'll show you something that I did, and this is definitely a reason why I would want to water my roots. Now, this is super dry right now, so just keep that in mind. I don't normally let my seedlings get this dry, but there's a method to my madness here. Now, these seedlings were planted in straight coconut coir. Again, I don't normally do that either, but it's an experiment. I got a couple experiments going on. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 seedlings in this cup. This is Mexico midget tomatoes. Super awesome. I'm doing another experiment with these this year. So I ran out of space. Now, you see I've got my Mostly Feral Gardener shirt on today. I started the group because it was super fun. It was a conversation between a friend of mine about calling myself feral or a feral gardener or mostly feral gardener. And I'm mostly feral for the most part in general. So what I did was I didn't have a lot of garden space, extra garden space. I have a lot of garden space, but I have this brand new garden area that I've gone live in a couple times, and I'm planning on putting 24 or 25 raised beds in there. So I'm going to need seedlings to transplant, but I didn't have an area to put them in right away. So I took some cups and I put some soil in it, or I put some coconut coir. This one's just coconut coir. And I just plopped a couple seeds in there and let them grow. So now, what am I going to do? Now I have to transplant them. Now this would be considered up potting. So when you have smaller cells or smaller containers, this one is actually a medium-sized container for me because I have some that are really small. And the roots need more room. And I can already see the roots. You may or may not be able to see it. I can already see the roots popping out of the bottom of this cup. So what I'm going to do to this to up pot is I'm going to take this entire, the entire thing of tomatoes and coconut coir, roots and all, and I'm going to very gently up pot. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a bowl of water, and I've done this a couple times, and I'm going to swish the bottom of the soil in the water to loosen the roots. Now, you can do this if you're transplanting straight into the garden as well, because sometimes loosening those roots will give them a better chance of spreading into your soil so they're not stuck in a little clump. You don't want to wait until your seedlings have wound their roots around that container, because then they can get root bound, and that's not good either. So with 5 seedlings in 1 cup, there's going to be a lot of roots in here. I probably should have done it earlier, but I wanted to share this in a video. So what I'm going to do, and I can't do it out here because I don't have a bowl. I would have. I totally forgot. So I'm going to gently, here's what I do. I'm going to squeeze gently around the bottom to loosen up the soil. I don't want to mash it, just squeeze it gently. Then I'm going to have my hands, and I'm going to hold here with the soil, and I'm going to dump it upside down. Then it'll gently come out. Don't transplant by just pulling these up. If you pull them, you might lose all of your seedlings. I'm also not going to handle my seedlings when they're wet, because I don't want to have any kind of issues, diseases, and things like that, which is why, like I said, this is dry. So then when I take this whole chunk of coconut coir seedlings and roots, I'm going to gently swirl it around in a bowl to loosen up those roots. And that will allow me to gently pull apart these seedlings. Now, I've done this multiple times, and it's been very successful, and it allows me to plant more in a small area, so I don't have to have all of that set up when I'm just getting started. So there's an option for you, just in case. And so each of these seedlings is going to go in its own separate container, and that's what I would consider up potting. So sometimes people consider up potting. They take it from this small container and then they're going to put it in a much larger container. That's also up potting. And up potting is transplanting. It's just another way that we transplant, whether it's tomatoes or peppers. Now, I will say this. There are a couple things that I don't transplant. I direct sow specific varieties. So I direct sow carrots, beets, root crops like turnips. Let's see. There are some that just don't transplant that well, and that would be cucumbers and melons and corn. Those are varieties that I prefer to direct sow. So all of these, this is squash and beans right here. I direct sowed those so that I wasn't transplanting, because they just don't do very well when you transplant. Let's see. In the bowl of water, do you add root boost? No, but thank you, Missy. That was my next step. When I do transplant into the garden, I will definitely add root boost. Or if I was going to take these, I'm going to mix up my container garden soil, because again, these are outside, not inside. And that is compost, coconut coir, perlite if I have it. Sometimes I run out. And then I add mountain flower root boost. Now, when I transplant tomatoes and peppers, my heavy feeders, like I mentioned earlier, I do transplant with sometimes azomite and mountain flower root boost, and sometimes it's just mountain flower root boost. Kind of just depends on how I'm feeling. Or if I've already added certain nutrients into the soil, then I don't add more. So something to consider. So Missy asked about mountain flower root boost. I have had tremendous success using mountain flower root boost with my seedlings. Sorry, I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes out here too. So that is definitely something that I do when I transplant. So regular watering is important. I already mentioned that, but don't overwater it. Watch your weather. So because I have because I have an inch and a half and a rain coming, I don't really want to transplant a bunch and then risk them getting beaten down by either hail or a lot of heavy duty rain. So these are going to stay in their containers for one more day, and then I'll probably transplant them out on Saturday. Unless, of course, the rain comes on Saturday, and then we'll just figure it out from there. And now lastly, not lastly, but one of the things to remember too is to mulch and trellis. So I don't generally mulch right away. I will mulch after a couple days. And then that's also when you want to add your trellises. If you do transplant your cucumbers, for example, you're going to want to make sure that you provide them with a trellis. You don't necessarily have to do it the day of transplant, but sometimes it makes it easier. You want to cage your tomatoes after a certain amount of time. I can't tell you how many times I go, I'll cage that tomato tomorrow. And then a week or two goes by, and now all of a sudden I have this giant tomato plant, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you've got this giant tomato plant. Now you're trying to contain it in a cage. So consider that as well. Trellis, tomato cages, whatever you need. You want to do that earlier on so that you're not kind of wrangling these tomato plants that are kind of going crazy. So if you are growing in containers, if you are transplanting in containers, one really important part is you want to make sure you have a big enough pot. If you are putting lettuce, for example, you can put in something as small as a 3-gallon pot. But if you're doing tomatoes, you really want something bigger. I prefer a 5-gallon or a 10-gallon container. Now, let's say you've got a giant container. Say you've got a 20-gallon container. You can plant more in a single container. So in another one of my live videos recently, I showed in the background, I had some like 20-gallon containers, and I've got strawberries and bunching onions. So you could do, if you had tomatoes in a 20-gallon, you could add companions. So when you are transplanting your tomatoes, for example, now you can add some nasturtiums or some basil or some marigolds in that container. Again, if it's a large enough container, and that would be super helpful. By the way, if you haven't already, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. In the description section of this video, you'll find links to lots of great information. I mentioned companions. I've got a companion planting guide in there. I've got tips for seed starting. I've got tips for transplanting in my comprehensive planting guide. So super important to check it out if you haven't already. This week, there's also a seed giveaway. It's my spring seed giveaway. It's going on for a couple more days, so definitely go ahead and sign up for that as well. And I've got also some random stuff in there, the grow bags that we talked about a while ago, and heirloom tomato seeds. You can find at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. And if I don't answer your question live today, if I missed it, I do try to answer your questions, but it gets a little crazy and it's hot out here, so I may not see all your comments. I get distracted sometimes by the birds, by the bees, by the chickens. So you can always send me an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com, and I will try to answer your question as quickly as possible. So today's topic is transplanting. I've also discussed up potting. So you want to watch your weather, and here comes a beautiful sun. I'm about to roast out here. We talked about specifically a couple things. Making sure you had your space, your area all set up and ready to go. Watering, companion planting, choosing the right size container. All containers should have drainage holes. So I showed you this already, my cup. And I reuse these cups, which is nice. I reuse my containers, which is nice as well. Let's see, Denise says, great information. Thank you. And then also, you might find a link to the Mountain Flower Root Boost in the description section of this video, because it is something I use with my transplanted tomatoes specifically. Super important. That is it for me. Oh, Moonbladen says, one of my bare root raspberry plants has a long woody root stem about 3 inches below the crown. Should I prune that off before planting? If it is dead, yes. If it is not dead, no. And you can sometimes find out if the woody root is dead, if you can trim a piece off at the end. And if it is dead inside, then yes, trim it off. If it's not, then just leave it. Some varieties will spread using the roots. So you might see that it looks like it's dead, but it's not really. You can't really see it there. My butchered catnip plant, I just pulled a bunch off there to feed the chickens. So it just depends on whether the root is healthy or not, or whether it's done for. So that is it for me tonight. Before the sun roasts me anymore, I am Mary at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. And as I mentioned, if you've got any questions, please send me an email. Check out marysheirloomseeds.com if you want some awesome seeds, and check out my last videos that I've done in the last couple weeks. There's a lot of gathering information getting up to this point, choosing your garden space, what to plant, companion planting with basil, because I plant basil with everything. Alrighty, everybody. I am signing off for the day, and happy planting.